Last week, I posted a TikTok about my decision to boycott Eurovision for 2026. And to put it simply, the comment section got heated very, very quickly. The comments to this TikTok basically fell into two categories. Very morally essential. Well, why didn't you do this earlier? Yeah, of course you have to boycott. And then the other side of things, what use is boycotting? It's a completely pointless tool. You're not going to do anything. Great, Eurovision won't care that they've lost one viewer. And this is quite a common reaction to boycotts these days, where people either do think they are essential or completely and utterly pointless. But for me, I don't think it's as simple as categorizing it into one of those two. And realistically, this conversation spans far beyond Eurovision. So let's talk about it. Hi, my name's Lola, and I'm really interested in the systems of how things work. On this channel, I make videos about peace, society, and human behavior. And if you want to join me for future videos, be sure to subscribe below. So from a peace-building perspective, boycotts are one of the oldest tools of non-violent resistance. But as our world changes, the way in which we use the tool of boycotting has to change as well to adapt to the new environment. And these days, I think boycotting is quite misunderstood. There's a lot of arguments about boycotting without actually unpacking what they're designed to do, as well as what conditions are needed for them to work and what the limitations of boycotting are. Today, I'm not telling you whether you should or shouldn't participate in boycotts, but I want to break down the actual tool itself. I want to understand how boycotts work and function as a form of collective action, and also look into what peace and conflict research can tell us about why they succeed and why they fail. So let's first break down what a boycott actually is. A boycott is a coordinated withdrawal of participation, when a big group of people come together with the aim to pressure a target actor to change its behavior. Now, the pressure that group applies on the actor can be economic, as it usually is, but it can also be symbolic or a bit of both. Now, when I talk about economic pressure, I'm talking about someone deciding not to buy a service or product from an organization, or maybe not participating in a way that would allow them financial gains. But symbolic pressure is a bit deeper. We're talking about attacking the legitimacy and the reputation of an organization. Now, this often comes in how the boycott itself is presented and advertised, but underneath it all, the goal of a symbolic boycott is often to make it feel really socially uncomfortable for someone to participate. For example, if McDonald's is being boycotted, you don't want to be that person that turns up to your friend group with a McDonald's bag in your hand. The important clarification to make between economic and symbolic is that these days, symbolic pressure is much more common. It's really difficult to have a sustained economic pressure on a company, so often it really does target the reputations. So while it's quite difficult for a boycott these days to have the aim of bankrupting or putting significant financial pressure on a company, it's more the symbolic understanding of, hey, this isn't okay what you're doing, we don't accept this, and we need you to change something. Importantly, boycotts work through solidarity. Because we're living in a free market economy, it's really important where we spend our money, where we're putting our dollars, who we're supporting in that. And it only works if others recognize and join the signal. There are many potential targets for a boycott, and I think the most well-known is corporations or brands. But this can actually be very heavily expanded to governments and states, cultural or sporting institutions, and also individuals, though that's obviously a lot harder and raises some ethical questions. So boycotts are less about collapsing systems overnight and more about signaling where social boundaries are actually being drawn. Now, to break down boycotts a little more, I thought we could have a look through some of the most successful historical examples. Please know that this is not an exhaustive list, we would be here all night. The term boycott actually originated in Ireland in the 1880s, and of course we have the English to thank for it. Captain Charles Boycott was an English land agent in rural Ireland, and he was imposing really harsh rents on all of the local community members. Now, because of this, local activists organised a campaign of complete social isolation against him. They ostracised him, refused to work for him or serve him, and isolated him until he was basically forced to leave the country. And because the tactic was so successful, the name boycott ended up sticking as a way to describe this form of protest. One of the earliest large-scale examples of boycotting was the Swedish Swadeshi movement in India. This movement began during British colonial rule, at a time when the economy was structured to benefit the UK at the expense of local industries. Because of this, the Swadeshi movement encouraged people to boycott British goods and instead use locally sourced items. Participation was widespread across the country and embedded in their daily life, which made the boycott really, really powerful. But most importantly, it wasn't just the economic pressure. It was because boycotting became a shared expression of resistance and self-determination. The international boycott of apartheid South Africa is deemed by many to be the most successful boycott of all time. And it emerged in response to a system of racial segregation, which denied basic rights to the majority of the population. Inside South Africa, political resistance was brutally suppressed, so the pressure had to come from outside the country instead. Boycotts started to pop up all over the globe, and they targeted more than just the economic goods. It included the boycotting of sports and cultural events, and bit by bit, the legitimacy of the South African regime started to wear away. With the country being excluded from global culture, it really sent a strong message that the apartheid was completely unacceptable. And these boycotts in particular were especially effective because they were global, sustained over many years, even decades, and tied to a very clear moral framing. Next up, we have the Montgomery bus boycott in the US. The Montgomery bus boycott took place in the context of racial segregation in the US, a time where black people in America were legally required to give up their seats on public transport, and they faced all sorts of daily humiliation and violence. In 1955, Rosa Parks was arrested for refusing to give up her seat, which became a catalyst for collective action. In response to this arrest, locals began to boycott the buses and didn't use them for over a year. Instead, they coordinated carpools, alternative transport, and particularly due to the clear goals, strong leadership, and extensive community organisation, this boycott ended up being extremely effective in the contribution to desegregation. A more recent example of a boycott is the EndSARS movement in Nigeria. This boycott emerged in response to widespread police brutality, extortion, and violence by a special police unit known as SARS. For many young Nigerians, this violence was a part of their everyday life, and there was very little accountability being held by the government. As part of the movement, people combined street protests with the calling of boycotts of banks and companies that were seen to be supporting police violence. This case shows both the strengths and limitations of boycotting in the modern system. Because of social media, the boycott was able to gain rapid mobilization and visibility, but then sustaining participation over a long time ended up being really difficult, leading to that momentum having a deep fall. It's also important to acknowledge that boycotts are not always used for good and for liberation. Prior to the 1994 genocide in Rwanda, ethnic divisions were deliberately intensified through propaganda and economic exclusion. Tutsi communities were increasingly portrayed as outsiders and enemies, and boycotts were used to target Tutsi-owned businesses and livelihoods, reinforcing this social separation and contributing to the structural violence. There are many examples like this that remind us that boycotts are not inherently moral. Like any other tool, the impact depends on who uses them, against who, and for what purpose. All in all, these cases show that boycotts can be extremely powerful under certain conditions, but they can also deepen harm when used to exclude or dehumanize people. And understanding that difference is absolutely essential, especially if we continue the conversation about boycotts as a peace-building tool. So when do boycotts actually work? Looking across these historical examples, but also at the research, there are a few conditions that come up time and time again. Successful boycotts usually have clear and specific demands. People need to understand exactly what change is being asked for, rather than just what they're opposing. They also tend to work a lot better when there's a lot of high visibility and public awareness, because boycotts rely on solidarity, and solidarity comes from being seen. If no one is even noticing the withdrawal of support, the pressure just isn't there in the first place. Another important factor is the cost of participation. If joining a boycott requires extreme inconvenience or sacrifice, participants tend to not get involved as often, or they might drop out a lot quicker. In contrast, boycotts with a very low barrier to entry, where people can participate and it's not completely disrupting their everyday lives, they're much easier to sustain. Strong framing also matters. People are more willing to participate if they understand why the boycott exists in the first place, and also what values it's connected to. And finally, successful boycotts almost always involve some form of strong leadership or organisation, along with persistence over time. There are very few boycotts that work or succeed quickly. And in terms of how a boycott actually applies pressure, there are 4 key mechanisms: economic pressure, reputational damage, shifting consumer behavior, and collective action. Now, we talked about economic pressure and how withholding money can reduce revenue or really worry investors. But often the more powerful mechanism is this reputational damage. Media coverage, public criticism, and brand risk can make continued inaction really costly for the business. Boycotts can also shift behavior indirectly too. When people start to redirect their spending or participation elsewhere, it signals changing norms in society. And once the participation in the boycott reaches a certain point, it becomes easier for others to join because they're no longer acting alone. So when boycotts fail, it's not usually because people don't care. They do, it's just more often the goals are very vague or conflicting, participation becomes too inconvenient, attention moves on to the next big topic, or the target is simply too large and diversified to feel meaningful pressure. So an important takeaway here is that most boycotts don't collapse due to apathy. They collapse because participation drops below the critical level. Now, this brings us to something called the collective action problem. The collective action problem was originally an economic term, but we talk about it a lot in peace and conflict studies, and it helps us to explain why so many boycotts struggle even though lots of people are supporting them. The basic idea of the collective action problem is simple. Everyone benefits if the boycott succeeds, but participating individually can feel costly or inconvenient. Because of that, people often wait for others to act first. We call this reaction free riding, when people support the outcome, agree with the cause, and want change, but they don't want to personally change their own behavior. They're just hoping that enough other people will to get the ball rolling. And the problem with this is that when too many people think this way, participation never reaches the level needed to apply that real pressure, and then the boycott weakens and eventually collapses. This dynamic is especially strong today. Convenience culture raises the personal cost of participation. We're used to instant gratification, which makes long-term collective action harder to maintain. Our algorithms fragment movements, only showing them to certain people, making them disappear after a few days, and participation can become more symbolic or performative rather than consistent. So often boycotts fail because too many people wait for someone else to act first. And all of these reasons help to explain why boycotts can feel less effective today than they did in the past. We're constantly exposed to new and old crises in our news headlines, which creates fatigue. Brands and companies respond really quickly to calls for boycotts, absorbing or neutralizing the resistance by creating new deals, one-time offers. Online outrage cycles move quickly and they burn through fast. And because of our spread out global supply chains, pressure is spread across many actors rather than concentrated in one place. So on an individual level, it's easy to feel like one small choice doesn't matter, especially when the systems are massive, convoluted, and we can't quite understand how they work. But this doesn't mean people care less. It means we're operating in systems that are designed to distract, fragment attention, and exhaust our collective energy. It's why now it's more important than ever to put your money where your mouth is, to be clear about your goals and intentions. The current calls to boycott Eurovision and the withdrawal of 5 countries are best understood as symbolic boycotts. They're not setting out to economically harm Eurovision, and they're also not about targeting individuals. It's about the credibility of the institution itself and holding them accountable for the precedent they set. So in the case of Eurovision, which presents itself as an apolitical event but has always made political decisions in practice, from who is included, excluded, what songs are included or not, and who is treated as an exception. Their precedent was set 3 years ago when they banned Russia from the competition, and their decision to keep Israel in the competition this year is a double standard. This boycott is not about collective punishment. It's about challenging these double standards and asking who gets held accountable, who doesn't, and why. So if these big boycotts are often struggling, What does work better in today's context? Research and practice suggests that targeted pressure tends to be more effective than blanket boycotts. Focusing on very specific institutions or decision makers is clearer for everyone and easier to sustain. And importantly, low intensity, long-term participation also matters more than this short burst of outrage. Small, consistent actions over time are the things that increase the visibility and action of the boycott. And they're a lot more powerful than the very big dramatic gestures that fade quickly from people's minds. Especially in today's convenience culture, making alternatives accessible is really crucial for the success of boycotts. People are far more likely to participate when they're given practical options. Think about political advocacy, writing to institutions, and supporting affected communities directly. These can all have far more impact than just consumer choice alone. Remember that social change rarely happens overnight. It accumulates over time with a series of small shifts that eventually lead to the changing of cultural norms. So I hope through this video you've learned a little more about boycotts, where they come from, how they work, and that there's no such thing as perfect participation. Boycotts are only one tool, not the whole toolbox when it comes to non-violent resistance. And there's a lot more nuance involved than boycott good, not participating in boycott bad. Not all boycotts work, not all of them fail, and not all of them are inherently moral. From a peace-building perspective, ethical participation in boycotts isn't about purity. It's about making careful, considered choices, understanding the impact that you can have. I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. Whether you've participated in boycotts, your reasons why or why not, and whether you still think they're effective in our modern day. So let me know your thoughts, and if you liked the video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe to my channel for more video essays soon. And above all, stay curious and compassionate. Bye!